When I was in my 20s, I got an advice from someone, a writer. We were working in the same library. He was older than me, and he had been rejected for 7 years, I think. He never stopped writing, but then when he read my early work, he said, "There's something here, but you don't write for yourself." So, as banal that seems, to me, that's the time when I understood that I had a craving for writing. I wanted to be a writer, to write as a writer, but I had to move on from the journal format that was really important into something, again, more generic in the good sense or universal. So to me, that simple advice, you don't write for yourself, was really important, from switching codes from a kind of very private and intimate writing that would nurture the different kind of writing. But that leap was very important, and in order to do so, you have to share your work. So I spent a lot of time in my youth being frustrated because I was not being published, but I didn't even send my short stories out or my early novels out. So how can I be published if I was not read? Because I was really, I think I had this idea that I had to be discovered. It was very something romantic that probably I had my whole life, that somebody had to find me and discover me. And that doesn't usually happen. You have to walk out of, your room where you're writing for yourself. And then when you step out and you realize that you're writing for something that is different from you and beyond you, it's a really beautiful moment. I wrote 5 novels, I think 10 short stories, some long forms. And when I think of how the process was, I think it felt right from the start in a very few cases. So I think it usually happens that I feel this click while I'm at half of the piece, and sometimes by the very end. So I'm not afraid of wasting ideas. I'm not afraid of wasting time or wasting materials. And I never throw out stuff, which sounds very odd in a way, but I'm lucky enough that all of this torturous process in the end that turns right. I don't get afraid if it's not an immediate good start. And sometimes I feel aspiring writers get the opposite advice, that you have to follow the right note. It has to, almost the beginning of a song, and that really rarely happens. It can sound really bad up until one point where new instruments come into the song, and finally it makes sense. I recommend the books that I end up reading, if not every year, almost every 2 years. One is The Waves by Virginia Woolf, because I feel that something that sounds impossible once you have the idea of it, then translates, and I think that's a book about translating vibrations of life in sound, into language, into written language, is really important, because although you don't understand it all the time, the book, and sometimes it can feel overwhelming and overbearing and confusing. At one point, it all melts in a sense of feeling and beauty that I think makes it Woolf's masterpiece. The book that turned me into another person, and I like to recommend, is Underworld by DeLillo, because it really manages to withhold, again, when we speak about the universal value of literature, through different intertwined stories, the sense, the spirit, I think, in a very romantic, almost 19th century way, the spirit of people, I recently read a line by Cesare Pavese, my favorite Italian author, and I like to recommend his journals called Messiere di Vivere. I don't know if it's in Danish. I think it's being retranslated into English. And although Susan Sontag said that this author achieved his best only in his emo writing, when he was writing about being dumped or let down, usually by women he couldn't have access to. I do think that that's a beautiful case where, again, the journals I was mentioning before can turn into literature. And there's something so nostalgic when you see a writer that pretends to write for himself, to understand better himself, but it's constantly building an army of readers and audience, and he was so desperately striving to be in touch with other human beings. I don't know, I think that's an advice not only for writers, but in general for life, to read that book.